So moving on, particulates, of course, they don't look good in the water. Suspended solids give it a haze, make it look unattractive, which even if there's no other problems with it, it doesn't look like anything can get cleaned by using it. And in fact, these suspended solids can be deposited during cleaning and rinsing. So in other words, you're hosing down a tank and a little bit sits somewhere. If it doesn't run off completely and fast enough to keep those in suspension, they can settle out, and you can have what you think is clean now has a film on it that's been left by this water. Once you have suspended solids or these particulates, it can also create havoc really when you start rinsing out filter pads, or especially membrane filters, where when you're done with a membrane, you flush it out with cold water and then hot water, and if you have particulates in your water, it can start plugging it up. And these membrane filters are not cheap, so it can actually get quite expensive in the long run. They also have kind of an interesting effect, and so if you have water that's we'll say contaminated with some bacteria, there's some pretty effective ultraviolet systems that you can put in line. Basically, usually right where it comes into the building, you plumb this in, and it shines a very intense ultraviolet light through the water as it passes through the pipe. The little bits of suspended solids can actually create shadows from this, and bacteria can find a little spot to find refuge inside that or around that particle, and actually will be shielded from the ultraviolet. So of course you're then thinking that you have clean water when actually it's getting contaminated downstream. So for that reason, there's often a particulate filter immediately before these ultraviolet filters, and so a very important step. So particulates, we can think, well, it's maybe not such a big deal, but really it does create some problems for us. Microorganisms, of course, we're trying to get rid of them in sanitation, or at least reduce their population. And if we have water that's contaminated with microorganisms such as bacteria, then we're basically adding to the microbe load that we're trying to eliminate, and so we can create a worse problem than we started out with. Some of these bacteria also have odors, as I mentioned earlier, and that's never attractive, and can also mess up the wine a bit. And if they're there, then there's other problems with the system, and you may be getting contamination another way. So runoff from the ground, or worse yet, a septic tank. Situations that you really don't want. So microorganisms are used as an indicator that you have problems with your water, and even if not required, I would recommend that you have your water tested by the county health board at the minimum, or if not them, at least an independent lab, so that they can give you all the analyses of the water. And in fact, it may be that you are required to have your well approved or your water source approved by either the Board of Health, so on the county level, or State Department of Ag, depending on the jurisdiction and who decides they wants to come out and visit you. In any case, it's important, I think, to consult with your supplier of who you're buying your sanitation and cleaning chemicals from. If you approach them with a lab analysis of your water in hand, it's quite likely that they'll be able to look at the numbers that you've got, look at the conditions of your water, and make recommendations based on that. And so, one thing you can think about is that you're paying really a lot of money in some cases for a good sanitation system. And if you kind of mess that up because your water isn't effective, in other words, the conditions of your water don't match your sanitation, then you really aren't gaining anything, and in fact you're flushing a lot of money down the drain, so to speak. So for that reason, I think it's important that you talk with them, talk with your supplier, work with your Board of Health or Department of Ag, make sure you're in compliance with them. If you do have municipal water, it's probably worth investing in a good chlorine system, chlorine removal system, I should say, or anything else that's in there. I mean, sometimes they treat it with other things to get it clean, and the water can be kind of smelly. So I would suggest considering filtration and water treatment system as required to give you the best quality water, which will in turn let your sanitation system do what it's designed to do. So in terms of the actual water then, let's say we've got it all cleaned up and we're ready to start going. I would say that it's essential, and let me stress that again, it's essential that you have adequate water in all of the processing areas. Not that you can run a hose across the building and across the driveway or something like that to get water there, but rather that you actually have the water in place, plumbed in and ready to go. And one of the requirements, or two requirements I should say, is that you have adequate system pressure. Normally 30 pounds per square inch would be like a minimum household, and I would say that for a winery operation that's way too low. Some of the best systems that I've worked with have been closer to 75 or 80 pounds of pressure. And really at that type of pressure you have good power to blast anything off that you're working with, and so you're not kind of doing a weak job of rinsing and cleaning. So good pressure is very, very essential. And at the same time, if you have a lot of pressure, you need a lot of flow rate, because there are times when you're going to want to flood something with a lot of water to make sure it's very clean. And time is money, so if it takes you a long time and you're not really getting good flow, then it may not be rinsing everything off as effectively as it could be. So don't scrimp on what you're spending on your water system, but rather make sure that everything is in fact appropriate. And if you have high pressure and also a lot of flow, you need to have the plumbing that's going to handle that type. So work with a good plumber in that, or a good mechanical engineer in any case. Hot water is important. I have worked in wineries where there is no hot water, and it is the most frustrating thing one can imagine. Even if it's just a little water tank, at least there's some hot water. However, I would say that if you have hot water, and you should have hot water, you should never run out of hot water. You should always have enough to do whatever it is you're doing and complete the task. If my experience with hot water tanks, so like kind of a residential 40-gallon hot water tank, is that it doesn't take long if you're cleaning a big tank or trying to flush down a press pad or something like that. It does not take long to run out of hot water. And of course, the experience there also is that if you're in the middle of cleaning something and the water starts getting cool, you generally don't stop and wait for it to heat up again, but rather just keep going, and eventually you're just using hot water. And as far as the temperature goes, I have seen systems that again will dispense water up to 180 degrees, and at that temperature you are almost able to sanitize by heat alone. But I think if you can't quite get to that range, and you're pushing a lot of like hoses and systems that aren't quite set up for that temperature of water, but slightly below that's fine, then I think you'll find that the cleaning's a lot easier. And in fact, probably one of the most obvious things is that if you hit tartrates, so in other words those potassium bitartrate crystals that precipitate out of wine during fermentation and during aging, they sometimes will glue themselves to a tank wall, or especially barrels, and they don't come out. But if you use the hot water on them, they dissolve actually pretty easily, and sometimes you can just hose them off and with hot water, and they fall right off the side of the tank kind of nicely. Sometimes you do have to use a cleaner, and an alkaline cleaner works best on that, but you can get by with hot water in a lot of cases, as long as the water's hot enough and you have good flow rate and also good pressure. Sanitizers often are more effective, and this is dependent on the sanitizer itself, more effective at high temperature water than with low temperature water. So again, work with your chemical supplier and make sure that what you have for water source, whether it be cold water or hot water, is adequate for the task and adequate to what he is trying to sell you or she is trying to sell you. And finally, if you do have hot water that's very hot, so you're pushing that 180 degree Fahrenheit mark, make sure that your hoses will handle that temperature at the pressure you've got. A lot of times standard garden hoses will not, and what you'll see is basically they start to bulge right where the fittings are, and they start bulging, they get bigger, that bulge gets bigger, and pretty soon it thins out the hose enough that it will burst and spray you with hot water, which could cause actually severe burns at the temperatures we're talking about. So make sure your hoses will stand the temperature and pressure. Nozzles are set up so that they're insulated, well insulated, especially if it's hot water. And probably the best thing is just to wear a pair of rubber gloves at all times, and that seems to work in terms of keeping you from getting burned quite as much. So that's kind of a rundown of water and some considerations that we need to think about with it. And so I guess in closing, what I would say is what's important to remember is that water is essential, water is necessary, water is easy to get a hold of usually, but in any case we have to treat it well.